Welcome, everyone. This is Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I will be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about the idea of what's going on in the world with our species, the evolution of us, and so much more. When we start to look at the world beyond what society is, we start to see what people are truly becoming. We can see how the generational mindsets, how generations are starting to think in a way that is going to be different than the humanistic, ethical, moral compass that many of us have, but maybe we're not taught, or maybe we have stepped away from, because we have, I guess you can say the word is, we have become numb from paying attention to the things that are bad in our life. We have a very negative connotation for what people are. We avoid people, we avoid eye contact, we avoid shaking hands, and we avoid smiling at people and saying hello. I mean, the basic necessities of us is to learn how to be interdependent with each other, to work together. But yet we have this very individualistic type of mindset where we live this lifestyle where it's about us, where it's about very singular stuff, one nation, one culture. We start to keep pushing that, and that mindset starts to create discrepancies, and then hate, I guess you could say negativity also starts to form. What do we do about it? Well, we have to give ourselves an awareness of what's going on in the world, and then from that awareness, we start to implement strategies that we can become a kinder person, better humans, and then when that happens, our relationships are going to start to prosper. For the relationships that are not doing good right now, that doesn't necessarily mean your love life. It can mean, again, your family. It could be your love life. It could be your work life, your coworkers, etc. And then the relationship with yourself. Sometimes we forget all of that. We don't treat ourselves well. The moment we stop treating ourselves well, we're going to have a difficult time treating other people well too, because the negativity is going to be there. It's going to be stagnant. And there's going to be moments when we smile, when we push through a bit of kindness, but we always fall back into that slump if that is where your homeostasis negativity bias is, where you're just like, I'm in this circumstance, my life is tough, the world is going to end. We have this focus that is not going to help the mindset. So we have to look at what needs to be done. How can we start to repair the things that are broken so we can live in prosperity in the world? Because we do have a mindset that is going to be do or die, or do your part. But what is your part? Do you understand what that is? Today we're going to be talking about all the different nuances with my guest, Jim Loehr. He's going to be helping us understand that there is a certain type of brain we need for survival today. Sometimes we have to hit the brakes and look at where we're going, check the map. Are we still going in the right direction? And if not, let's make some changes. So let's get into that interview with my guest, Jim Loehr. Welcome, Jim Loehr, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Michael. Thank you for having me. I hope we can create some interest and excitement for your audience.
Of course. And today we're going to be talking about your work, performance, psychologist, and you're an author. We're going to be talking about your latest book, Sapiens Reinvented. I always find authors to be amazing individuals, right? What drives you to write a book? Is it the aspect that you have some wisdom that you want people to know in the world, or that you see something in the world that people are not readily taking advantage of? In our world today, schooling has taken over the aspect of education and learning. Most people, they just kind of go through the ebb and flow of going to school, but they fail to get an education. I love reading books because it's going to give you that experience, that education, that knowledge, that wisdom, everything we need to continue to grow and become better. But in your own words, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and how you help?
So, I'm my master's and doctorate in psychology, and I was originally prepared and trained to be in community mental health. And I became executive director and chief psychologist of a very large community mental health center system that served the whole central and southern part of Colorado. but I became associated with a brilliant, genius exercise physiologist by the name of Dr. Joe Vigil. And he challenged me he asked me to help him get more out of his athletes. He was a track and field genius. And he said, Jim, what can you tell me as a psychologist that'll help me get more out of my athletes? And I looked at him like a deer in headlights and said, Joe, I have no idea. I know how to help people who are struggling with mental health issues get a little better, but I don't have any idea how to apply psychology to healthy people and get them to be extraordinary. And he said, Loehr, you ought to look into that. That's the new field. This was in the 70s. And I said, oh my gosh, so he said, will you do a literature search for me? So I did and found there wasn't a whole lot. And I started doing work with him and his athletes, and I became intoxicated with it. And I eventually, resigned to a 23-member board of directors and launched this career, which really was just, nobody was in that field. I mean, it was a specialty that hadn't really found its own yet. And I spent 6 years at the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy, which was like 2 PhDs for me because I didn't know anything. And I collected all this data around all these great athletes, Andre Agassi, Monica Seles, Jim Courier, tennis players. And then I went on with Dr. Jack Groppel, who he had his PhD in bioengineering. And we wanted to set up a science-based approach to human performance. And so we established it at a place called Lake Nona, which is a suburb of Orlando. And we built the Human Performance Institute, which probably had, by the time we left, somewhere around 400,000 elite performers from every conceivable aspect of human performance go through. It was the greatest living lab I could ever imagine. I'm a data guy. Our faculty was the most prestigious faculty ever assembled in the area of high performance. Former commander of the SEALs, former commander of the Blue Angels, elite fighter pilot, and a lead instructor from the Air Force Academy, gold medalists, silver medalists. It was an amazing faculty. And we ended up selling it to Johnson & Johnson, and I stayed on for another 6 years. I missed that completely, but that's where all the insights, and that's every one of the books that I have written came out of the data, that the insights that I got in that living laboratory. And if I got something that I thought might be helpful to other people, I'd write a book about it, like, the power of story, the power of full engagement, the stress for success, the only way to win, which was character, leading with character. Those were all out of the data collection that we had at the Institute with the thousands and thousands of people who went there. But my latest book is very different, Sapiens Reinvented. I have 7 grandchildren and 3 sons. And the more I began to look at this ethical and moral dimension of the human nature, which a lot of our work took us there, I started to get this gnawing sense that we are headed for a catastrophe as a species. And I said, if I can make any headway at all in trying to understand why humans, despite centuries of evolution and progress, why we still have such a deeply ingrained penchant for aggression and for violence. And so I started going into that and read all the most important authorities in that area that were just, to me, so courageous in pursuing man's inhumanity to its own. And I went down a rabbit hole. It was the most emotional thing I have ever experienced in my life. I wasn't sure I'd ever come back when I realized the cruelty we have since the beginning of mankind, of our species. What atrocities we have perpetuated in our own species. And we are the most benevolent species ever to be created. We are also the greatest malevolent species. we are the ultimate predator, and we can talk about that, but we now have 8 billion people on this planet, and 9 countries have nuclear weapons. And I see that we're racing toward the cliff. And I wrote the book to it's a call for people to pay attention to what's happening and to try to find a way to change this incredible genetic mandate to survive and to help our own offspring survive at any cost, and to find a better way to begin to replace aggression and violence with something that might save our species. So I don't think I've ever gotten so emotional in my life about anything as I did when I went into all these documents, all the wars. I mean, it was a harrowing experience, and still leaves a really dark place in my soul. But just in in World War II alone, there were 80 million people who were killed. And that's just the combatants. And then you have all the people, the suffering, the vengeance, the sadness. And I know no one wants to listen to that. So the book, I try to get through that quickly. No one wants to read any more bad news. We want some hope here. So where do we go with this? We first have to recognize what the heck's going on with our species. Where are we headed? And what might be the answer? And I came up with my own answer, albeit as maybe simplistic as I could imagine, but it was the best I could do, and it was just my effort. I'm trying to recruit people to this cause, which I think is the greatest cause we have, and that is to help our species survive and to protect ourselves from ourselves.
The aspect of human nature is almost like a cycle where we start, maybe we're not in the best place, we become a little bit better, and then we might maintain what we had, and then we destroy everything and we start from scratch. And that evolution has kind of been trickling down, so it has been watered down almost from where we were. We can even look at the Mayans and how the Mayans have vanished, and because of illnesses and the like sicknesses and stuff from the Europeans could have played a role. But technology has played a critical role in how people are operating and thinking in our life today. Think of, I'm not sure if you know this phrase, TikTok brain, where people have a very short attention span, and it's about 4 to 6 seconds. Maybe some people can go up to 8, but they have a very short attention span. Negativity actually is a good thing for most people because the brain is naturally attracted to negative. So they will say, oh, wow, negative. So that's why they'll watch news all day long. And then they worry about all the possible things that could go wrong. And we should give some attention to that. For example, as you said, 9 nations, they have nuclear weapons. We should be concerned if they're going to do that. What type of harm would that cause, right? Because even if we lost, let's say 30% of our population in the nuclear war, we would go into a tailspin and crash.
No, I mean, you're 100% correct. This notion that our brains are always changing. They're very malleable, and particularly with youth. And that's why when kids are on their iPhones and social media, their attention span is less than 10 seconds. And the brain becomes acclimatized to that kind of input and very short bits of information, not really looking at anything in a comprehensive way, and not fully engaged almost in anything except something that might spark an interest for a moment, give them a little jolt, and then on to something else. Their dopamine is the substance that's responsible for all addictions, and they get a little jolt, a little reward, and the brain starts modifying itself. But one of the things that the human race has failed to do is to modify this genetic predisposition to solve its issues, to find ways to solve the mandate of survival, and to make sure that your progeny also survives, is to use whatever means are necessary, and often that involves violence and aggression. And we're very smart. We figured out almost anything and everything, but we haven't figured that one out yet. And yet we've figured out how to tame. It's called, domestication of animals who have very aggressive tendencies. We can have canines of all kinds. We can have them raised with birds that were, their arch, kind of rival. And you can have just about almost anyone. If you train them properly when they're young, they can become very docile, very loving, and they've changed the way their brains work. It's not happened with humanity. Humanity is, if you look into from just about every aspect, from the Gaza Strip to Ukraine to all over our campuses in the United States, I mean, every single issue has some kind of aggression or violence associated with it. And my biggest concern is the world that my children and that my grandchildren are going to have, if there is a world. And I spent way too much time going into the lives of people who were involved in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And our country tried to cover all the pain and suffering of those children that were absolutely nearly burned to death. The ones that survived were the real tragedies, because, their eyes were burned out, their flesh was literally burning, and they still had a heartbeat. And these were often children. And you begin to wonder what race or what species would do this to its own to accomplish something that, I mean, we do to our own what no other species would do to its own. And so the book is really designed to try to get people to think about this in a way that we've learned that the single greatest deterrent to evilness, to violence, unprecedented violence, is something very simple. It's empathy. It's caring and understanding. The more you understand that we're all part of the same species, Homo sapiens. And the more we can walk in someone else's shoes, the less likely we are to be aggressive against them, and to share what we have with others, and to try to find a way to get along on this earth so that we all can prosper. And, religion tries to do it, but there's a lot of religious wars that have been heinous, unbelievable. And so many times you see the leaders who started out being, really under the cloak of righteousness, were doing this for the good of mankind, like Hitler's Final Solution. He thought the world would come and really thank him for cleaning up the species, that there was a blight in the genetic development of our species. And if you can get rid of the mongrels, he called them, or the cockroaches, or the swine, everyone will come back. And then he realized that was going to be 11 million people we had to put to death. We had to get rid of all of them and clean the blood up, clean the bloodline up. And, then he had to realize, well, how are we going to get rid of 11 million people, 6 million Jews and 5 million mongrels? How are we going to get rid of them? Well, finally, they started incinerating them by the thousands in death camps and all over Germany. And then you read the reports of all the soldiers when they finally got there. It takes you down a rabbit hole that's so, and a lot of those, soldiers who went through that was the most brutal part of their experience of war, is seeing what was going on in those death camps and trying to somehow find a way. How does this happen if you're a human being? How can you do this to others? And the answer is you dehumanize those who are different from you. You can do anything if the person is not human. If they're beasts of burden, and it's been going on since the earliest origins of man, of humanity. And so we've got a big challenge. And, we have worked very diligently because the victors usually had the most powerful new weapons. And if you trace history, those who found the weapons before someone else, they took the territory, they took the resources, and they had more of a chance of survival for their offspring. And this coded mandate, survive at all costs and get your offspring to survive at all costs, take care of your own. And if you have to destroy a lot of people in order to do that, you actually are sanctioned. And so that Hitler and all of the Russian SS troops, they believed they were doing something good for mankind. Very rarely do people do things under the guise of evil. They do it under the guise of, this is the right thing to do, and it fits my moral, ethical, equation. And so, we've come a long way. All of that has really helped us survive and thrive to 8 billion people on this earth. But now we have weapons that can literally destroy planet Earth. One country can destroy planet Earth. And so if we don't change this propensity for violence as a way of solving our conflicts, the future of our species is really very, very much in peril. And so I try to put out, I think the greatest opportunity we have is with children. Everybody wants children, because children really, it's like a blank slate. You can create, if you get a young canine, a young, very aggressive dog species, but you raise them properly and put them in a very specific environment, they can be as gentle as a Labrador. And species that never got along, if they're raised together, they actually protect one another and care for one another. It's not really, I call it self-domestication, where as humans, we are not finished domesticating yet ourselves. We figured out how to do it with animals, but we haven't figured out how to do it with our own. And our only hope, and the book points this out, is with parents, mostly parents, teachers, and coaches who have access to the young minds who are out there. And if they go to universities and the university professors teach violence as a way to get to right a wrong, they simply stir the pot. Our genetic code loves that, because that's how our ancestors survived. So it's, as I said earlier, before we got on the show, that this is probably it was by far the most difficult book I've ever written. And it's the most important I've ever written. I could have made it 500 pages, but I made it short because no one wants to read all the terrible stuff that I went down and read. You just can't do it. There's too much stress in the world. I don't want to get any more bad news. I want some idea of what the heck can I do as a mother or father with my kids. So I have a lot of families who are now practicing what the book is all about. And I was very encouraged this week. I heard that the book became #1 on Amazon, the #1 bestseller in behavioral psychology, in evolution, and in teen and young adult inspirational and personal growth. #1 in all 3 categories. And that just made my heart sing, to think that maybe someone out there in our world may find value in this. I'm really pushing for the world against aggression, that people actually get up and try to make this a major, major factor of their raising of children. Congress, all over the world, people start trying to figure out how to curb this propensity for aggression and violence as a way to solve our issues. But it's a big ask, and it's not going to happen quickly. I just hope it happens fast enough, so that we can, in fact, save our species from itself.
When we look at, going back to how we domesticate animals, like we could use sheep, for example, they would breed the sheep that were docile, that had good tendencies to be calm. For any sheep that was disobedient, a rebel, let's say, they would kill it, because they didn't want that DNA bred into the other sheep.
They perpetuated.
when we fast forward a little bit, they try to do it with humans, especially with boys. Oh, boys have ADHD. They'll give them all of these medicines that they need to do to put them on IEPs. And then we wonder why later on in life we have a issue with them not knowing what's morally correct and propensity for violence because now they have not learned to manage it. They have learned to only bandage it, cover it up, right? I'm going to put it away, but yet it's still there. Think of it as like a fire. Like, let's say you go camping. If you have like a little fire, you might cook some stuff on it, whatever, but you don't properly douse it. Let's say some wind comes and then there's some dry leaves around there. It can create, like a huge forest fire because you didn't do the work to take out that fire and make sure it's, properly quenched and that it wasn't going to create any embers or any type of heat or smoke that would cause a huge fire. In a sense, people, they have that fire within them, but we hide it away. We don't teach them how to manage it or how to utilize it properly. So it's only a breaking point. Like we can see what's happening on all of the colleges' campuses today. It's a breaking point where they had that fire and it finally, smoldered up. The smoke got hot enough and now there's a fire. So, I mean, we can expect civil war. We can expect a world war, maybe. This is an issue that we have to begin to address. You said that, parents and coaches and teachers are going to be able to help children, understand that. And then as we go with generations, we can mitigate it later on. But what can we do today? What can we do to implement a better system that people can live in harmony?
Well, first of all, we have, it takes us back to neuroscience. I love the study of neuroscience. I surround myself with people who are very, very skilled and knowledgeable in that area. We build a whole program to help athletes do things that they never dreamed they could do and break frontiers and deal with issues that they thought they would die with. They were just barriers that were very, very, whether they be negativity or, prone to, temper tantrums in their sport or can't get along with people, can't focus, just on and on. And we found a way to train the brain to actually use the brain to change itself. One of the things that's so wonderful about the human brain, at some point in this evolutionary process, man developed the capacity to observe itself. The brain can actually watch itself, can actually see how it's functioning. And we can stand aside, the brain, we're the only species that knows we're going to die. And that creates almost an urgency that, if we never thought we were going to die, when your dog gets old, it just thinks it's going to go on and it gets older and older and it can't climb the stairs and it's going blind, but it doesn't realize that that's a precursor to what's coming, and that is you will be gone. You're dying. So human beings understand. We can look into the future. We can realize, where is this going to take us? Is this where we really want to go as a species? What is this going to mean for my children, for their children and their children? And the beauty of our brain is we don't have to wait for it to happen. We can look forward to what might happen and then say, wait a minute, let's work back and try to get a brain that prevents this from happening. And if parents have this first and foremost in their minds, that their job is to make sure that every single thing that comes up, I want you to understand that sharing is maybe the most important, and loving others and being good to other people, trying to find ways to teach them about how to love other people, how to care about your brother and sister, and really understand what goodness means, and that violence is never, ever a way to handle the problems, to hit your brother, to hit your sister, to strike your mom or your dad. Those lessons have to be implemented at a very early age, as soon as they start popping up. And remember, that's coded in the brain. To overwrite it, you're going to have to put a lot of images, a lot of new inputs in to override that genetic predisposition. And so the book is all about, how do you do that as a parent? Every single week for 20 weeks, you have a program that you are to do with your children And there are discussions, you write about it, you talk about it, you read stories. Kids love stories about how to resolve issues in a constructive way. All the cultures, particularly American Indian cultures, that's how they taught young people. That's how they shaped their brains about what was true and not true, and what it means to be, a noble warrior. That all came from learning. Our brain, just as in the early years, is just soaking information up like a sieve. But we just assume that it's all going to go right because we're good people and it's just going to go the way it's supposed to go. But it isn't going that way. It's not the way that society has designed itself, so that the penchant for aggression has somehow been reduced to almost nothing. And in fact, we encourage it. In fact, people who, I think protesters are a good example. The protesters who really commit violence get more attention. And if there's enough violence, people are going to change things. And so you think, well, that's the answer to everything, is to actually end up hurting people, threaten their lives, threaten their livelihood, threaten their businesses. And that now becomes kind of the norm for how we deal with issues. And it's often championed by very smart people, by university professors, by people who've been raised maybe in a culture of aggression. And so this is countercultural. It's like, but why should we even be concerned about it? Let's just let it play out. Well, I can tell you, I've spent endless hours trying to find a way that this can play out in a way that, doesn't really destroy the very essence of who we are and what civilization means to us, and maybe the existence of our species on this planet. If we were to deploy even 10% of the nuclear weapons that are now available, and every country wants them, countries that don't have them want them, because that's the equalizer, and that's how they will show that they can withstand any kind of intrusion, whether it's an intrusion with thought or some kind of doctrine that people want to enforce upon them, or any religious or just any kind of thought process that may be antithetical to how they want to have their children live. And so they're going to use whatever means. And if they have nuclear capabilities, they can stand and actually threaten the world. Leave us alone, or we want these things, give them to us. Whether North Korea is saying, we want food, we want this, we want that. And if we don't get it, and we want respect, and if we don't get it, we're going to nuke the United States. And we have the missile capability of doing it. Well, that is the mentality. And that has been inside of us since the beginning of Homo sapiens. That is how the species has survived. But if you extrapolate that into the future, we don't have much of a future. And I try to bring out an example of how we might correct this, and where it has actually worked in the past, and how it's worked with subhuman species. Why can't it work with human species when we are far more intelligent and we can develop technology that will really help us to find solutions other than through aggression and violence?
As we begin to wrap up, because I loved everything we talked about, and I think this is critical information for individuals to understand and implement it now, not later when everything is on fire. Where can people find you, learn more about your work, and get this book?
So it's available on Amazon, anywhere. It's most book outlets. It's available. You can reach me on Jim-Loehr, that's LOEHR.com, or on LinkedIn. I'm very active. I have lots and lots of videos and all kinds of assets that I collect on my website. If you're interested in the work I've done professionally with all the athletes and with high performers, my whole approach has been helping people learn how to win. And now I'm trying to figure out, how do we get how do we get our species to win without destroying itself? And I have a lot of things that I've accumulated over nearly 40 plus years of work. And I'm just sincerely hopeful and optimistic that Sapiens Reinvented will spark something in people that will maybe get them to think about this in a way they never have before and take action to try to really reshape the way all those in their environment think about these critical issues of who we are as a species and who do we want to be.
Powerful. I'm going to make it easy for everyone. I will toss your website in the description box below. I was on it earlier. It's easy access to get to the book on Amazon or any outlet, Barnes & Noble, etc. You do want to make sure you're giving yourself this information because this is going to be something that you're not going to readily hear on the news. You're not going to read many articles about it just on regular blogs because most of the things that are clickbait are things that are not necessarily going to educate you to be a better person, to make better choices in life, and to change any generational curses that you might have. I do want to thank you so much, Jim, for coming on, talking about your work in your book, and then trying to educate the world on how to be better and to live a more sustainable life. All right, everyone, I'd like to thank you so much for tuning into that interview with my guest, Jim Loehr. As you can see, a different turn to coaching in session because we're talking about the global aspect of what's going on in the world and what needs to be done. We talk about the ideas of fear that are always going to be present because we don't necessarily know what someone else is going to do because they are in control of their own thoughts, their feelings, and their actions. There are things that we can do to mitigate some dangers and to influence others to operate in a way that's going to be beneficial to us, but not so much in the controlling sense. Because if I'm kind to a person, typically they're going to be kind back. If I'm mean and I'm rude to a person, I expect for them to be mean and rude back. However, sometimes we can be docile, right? We talked about the idea of being docile. That person might become recluse, might become afraid, and they become quiet, they become still, and they go home and they resent the day. I just destroyed that person. It might not have been intentional, but it wasn't beneficial. As humans, we have to understand that we can either lift people up or we can bring people down. There's also the aspect of we can just leave people alone. But I always say, if you ever look down on a person, make sure you're looking at them to help them up, to give them a hand and say, come on, let's go. Let's get up. Let's dust you off. Let's keep moving. That is powerful. If you don't have any good intentions, you can just leave them alone. That can still have an effect on them because maybe they feel like they're being ignored. And then you have the aspect that if you are going to, belittle them, it's different than uplifting. So which ones do we do? And I'm not asking you to go out and be happy and cheerful to everybody because that's not going to be realistic for you and for them. Depending on where you live, it's going to be welcomed and it's not going to be welcomed. For example, in Connecticut, where I'm from, people live in a bubble. Here in Texas, people are very friendly and very open. Of course, Texas is more of a melting pot, especially if you go to the big cities, Dallas, Houston, Austin especially. You're going to get a wide range of people, maybe from California, from Florida, from New York. You have all these people coming because it's becoming the new Silicon Valley. You're getting the different cultures and different personalities where the boisterous and the loving, caring Texas feel is starting to dissipate slowly. It's becoming a bit watered down. Depending on where you go, you're still going to get that friendly, loving, hey, how are you doing? Howdy, handshake, eye contact, whatever. A good feeling that you belong. And I noticed it the first moment I came and I visited Texas. I was like, this is crazy. I was like, these people are kind. They're trying to talk to me. I was like, this is weird. Because in Connecticut, I didn't get that. And I've been places. I'm well traveled. But it was different when I gave myself a mindset of wanting to live in a different situation. Because I was always thinking, I'm going to live in Connecticut. I'm stay with my family. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to have a family and raise them in Connecticut. But then when I started to give myself a different situation of living, I started to pay attention to people. I started to pay attention to the economy, everything, all the different aspects. And Texas was on my radar. And I said, this is what I want. This is what I want for myself. This is what I want for my kids. And if they choose to have their kids here, it's going to be great because they have that love, caring. And it was so funny because I even recall back when I was in college and my best friend at the time, he had his parents move to Houston, I believe. And I was like, are you going to move to Houston too? And he was like, no, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to find a way to, remain here. He basically, bunked up with some people. That was his life. I was always thinking like, why move to Texas? Like Connecticut is so great. And then I finally come and I'm like, now I understand. And it's not so much of that Connecticut is going to be a place where there's no opportunities, or maybe your state has no opportunities. It's just dependent on what you want. But then we also look at the aspect of our future. And that was basically what we talked about today, our evolution. We sometimes can only see ourselves. We see our lifetime. We see ourselves from maybe when we're young and we get our first memories to maybe when we're old and we retire, and maybe even as far as when we're on our deathbed. But what comes after you? Did we even pay attention to what comes before you? Can you remember the name of your great-grandfather? Most people can't. That's going to be you. Like your generations to come, they're not going to know your name. They're not going to know your legacy, your lineage. Why? What are you doing in order to imprint something that they will want to remember? Because we can look at the greats, right? We can look at the presidents and we could say, oh, I remember that president. Oh, I remember this person, this inventor, right? Benjamin Franklin, for example. Why do we know them? Because they created something that stood the test of time, or that stood the test of time. We have to give ourselves a more meaningful mindset, a mindset of longevity, not a mindset of destruction, not a mindset of fear. Because when we have that mindset of destruction and fear, we stop taking action, we stop paying attention, we stop worrying about what we're creating and start going into survival mode. How can we get out of it? Well, we have to get a brain of being good people. We have to have a brain of going against violence. We have to have a brain of unity and working together, because you grow the most when you are in prosperity. And I say this loosely because failure, right, being in a bad situation can propel you and give you the momentum to do great things. I'm not saying that that's not true. But what I'm saying is we need safety and security, and then food and shelter and stuff like that. We need our basic needs met before we can push forward. Sometimes people can push forward if they don't even have those basic needs met. Not many people do it though. It's a very small minority of people. And I'm not saying that you need to learn how to bypass your basic needs and necessities, because that is just not how the brain works. The brain is focused on survival, and it will focus on that as long as it needs to stay alive. What I will say is, if you do want to restructure your mind to think in that way, where maybe it is depleted or deprived, you basically have to go through that process of neuroplasticity and change the way you think. Our world today, we don't necessarily have to go through that harsh process of neuroplasticity and changing our foundation, our brain, our mindset, because it could be a strenuous and tedious thing, and not everyone's willing to start and finish. So instead, let's give ourselves a situation where everyone is abundant, everyone is prospering, everyone has potential, not limits. We have to change the way our brain is situated. And I encourage everyone to check out Jim's book. It's going to be a great resource for you to dive into, learn more about the mind, what's going on in the world, and then to give yourself a trajectory of where you want to be. Because in a sense, we all want to be someplace good, but we might not be doing the things that are good for us and good in our life and good for everyone else. This is not so much about opinions and assumptions either. This is about an understanding that to be human has certain standards. What does it mean to be human? Maybe to be kind to extent, right? But then again, we have that negative in our head. Why would I be kind to someone who's mean to me? Why would I care for someone who doesn't care about me? We have become very individualistic. And so we need to start to focus on our circle first. And then, if you want, your community. And then your nation, your country. And then the world. Start small. You already care about yourself, so you don't need to focus on that. And if you don't care about yourself, get some coaching, right? Care about yourself. That should be already there. Let's start to build our circle. Let's start to get the people that are going to help us understand and put us in a good place. Because the world is full of negativity. And the last thing we need is to be negative ourselves. Again, negativity may be able to push you, but positivity is going to keep you going in the fight way longer. I encourage everyone, like I said, check out the links in the description box below. Reach out to Jim, reach out to us here at Reven Concepts. Begin that journey to a better mind and a better life. My name is Michael Rearden. I'm a mindset coach. If you have any questions, email me coachinginsession@gmail.com. And I'll see everyone on the next episode of Coaching in Session. Until then, everyone take care.